And the first of the great people on the program is Victoria McLaughlin. She's the Director of Strategy Development at the Ministry of Justice. We all work in government agencies where we have established ways of working that are sometimes treated as sacrosanct, and you must just do it this way. Today, Victoria's going to talk about some recent work that she led that I had the pleasure of taking part in, and I hope the approach she took will challenge your thinking as it challenged mine. I asked Victoria what she wanted to do when she was 10, and without missing a beat, she's immediately replied, a mad scientist. Not just a scientist, a mad scientist. And I thought, that's excellent. And then when I asked what superpower she'd like to have, she thought about that for a bit longer. And then she said she'd like to have the power to make any day a public holiday. And I think we'd all like her to have that superpower. So please join me in welcoming Victoria McLaughlin.
I don't have that superpower, so I can't turn today into a public holiday. Though looking at that beautiful weather outside, I really would like to. So I am going to be talking about sort of the partnership between the business and ICT. But before I do that, I'd like you all to stand up. Gosh, what a compliant group of people you all are. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to ask certain groups of people to sit down at certain points. So I'm not going to make you do any sort of group exercise hugging thing going on. But those of you who are not part of working for a government agency, so if you're like part of a consulting firm or an IT firm, can you please sit down? Excellent. So only a few of you. Okay, so those of you who are not working in ICT, who are part of the business, can you sit down? Excellent. This is why I suspect, is based on what Govis is about, that you would all primarily be ICT people working in government, and that is the case. So I'm going to put a challenge down to you all. Next Govis conference, this room is going to be double the size. And the reason it's going to be double the size is you're all going to bring someone from the business with you. Someone who you need to, or they need you to be successful. Because the challenge really is about taking that sort of divide away from between what is the business and what is ICT. And really we no longer see it as sort of different silos, but really one and the same. So hopefully, if I come next year, I'm going to see not 200, but 400 people attending Govis. So that's my challenge to you. And on that, you may now rest. I believe I have a clicker here that's meant to work. And I have great trust in technology, so it's going to. So a ship in port is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. And since we're all talking about evolution, evolution is all about taking risk and actually trying to stretch further than we thought. And so I thought what Grace Hooper said was a good first quote. And just in case you didn't know who she was, because she's actually very influential to this room, and this does work, you can all read about her, but she was one of the first females in the US who actually influenced how we actually think about technology today. She did a lot of the programming, she was in the Navy, and she fundamentally was deeply involved in what we now think about in relationship to sort of modern technology. But I do like two of her quotes, because I think they're actually very pertinent to what we're talking about. A human must turn information into intelligence or knowledge. We tend to forget that no computer will ever ask a new question. And so really, fundamentally, this is all about the people and the change that we all try and lead. And also, humans are allergic to change. They love to say, we've always done it this way. I try to fight that. That's why I have a clock on my wall that runs counterclockwise. So definitely a woman who was very focused on change, a woman who was actually very influential, and someone who was quite pioneering considering the context that she was working in. A female in the Navy, it was a rare person indeed. So just in case you didn't know who she was, I thought I'd just start with a bit of a history lesson. Okay, so as was said, I am looking at how technology is evolving and how that actually changes the relationship between the business and ICT, and how that enables us to really go after things in quite different ways than we have in the past. So particularly in government, and I'm sure many of you are aware, we go off and we do big business cases. Some of them are very big, they're 150 pages long, and no one really reads them. Some of them are quite short. But we spend a lot of time developing these so that we can get money, and then we go off and we invest, and we go after building some enabling technology that will change how our organisation works. And what we're trying to do at the moment is change how early we bring technology into that investment cycle. So the work that we've just been doing at the ministry actually required us to not build technology, but use technology very early on in the design of our investment case. So we've used it to actually inform our advice that will be going up to ministers around this. So we haven't waited till we've got the investment case done and then gone and looked at technology. It's been an integral part of actually how we've gone about understanding the problems that we're trying to solve. And so I'm going to talk about that experience, mainly more as a background for the types of ways that we can start to think about the relationship between the business and ICT. So in the Ministry of Justice, we look after the courts and tribunals. I'm hoping that most of you haven't actually had to experience our services, because if you have, they're usually a very stressful point in your life. Either something's happened to your family or some sort of crime has been committed. And looking at you all, I'm sure none of you have ever done any breaking of our laws. But fundamentally, we have a group of people that come to us usually at times of great stress, and we have to support them through that process. And if you have experienced our process, it's very paper-based. In fact, if you get divorced, you've got two ways to pay us. You can come to the court and you can pay by FPOS, or you can send us a cheque. Yes, we're modern. That's why most people use lawyers, because they have checkbooks specifically to pay us. So we're quite paper-based. There are parts of our system that are more technology advanced, but fundamentally you could go into our courtrooms and you could be there in 1960. It's very similar. We do have technology, but it's not fundamental to a lot of how we deliver our service. So we're looking at something called Caseflow management. Fundamentally, how do we support cases end to end, from the point that I, as let's say a lawyer, need to be able to file documents or pay something, right through to the end and resolution of a case, and how we use technology to support that process. So when I talk about Caseflow management today, that's what I'm talking about, because we desperately want to move away from checkbooks, because I'm sure that's the only reason banks still have them. So we are looking at how you can electronically file, pay, all those things that you would expect, be able to administer and orchestrate a range of very complex cases, look at how we roster and schedule our resources. It's quite a complex area across justice in regards to how we get the right judges in the right courtroom with the right people, with the right AVL, and some of those people will be actually coming in by remote ways into the court, and they're actually being held at a correctional facility. So how do you make sure they're in the right AV suite so that our cases go ahead on the day? And that's what rostering and scheduling is about. And then judicial case management. So we support judges, of course, right through the process of a case. So that's what we mean. And we had this issue as we came about this, and the ministry has looked at this problem a couple of times, where we have got ourselves into a bit of a tangle about how we go about it. So we all can agree that we don't want the type of paper-based way of operating now. We're quite clear on that. Everyone has a shared vision There's quite a lot of strong leadership around that vision, both from the judiciary and ourselves. But we can't really agree how. And so we could have gone through a process where we continued to debate that on paper. And we have architects, we have the business, and everyone was in different camps. And we have had a period of time where people have been writing their paper that counteracts someone else's paper, and it was like, oh my God, we're never going to get anywhere if we keep writing paper. And which person do I trust over who? How do I know? So that was our dilemma. How did we move out of this cycle of debate into a place of better knowledge? The other issue that we had is if I am a business that is used to working in a certain way, asking me what my requirements are is relatively pointless, because I know today I don't know the art of the possible. So yes, you could spend lots of time mapping current state, then spending lots of time mapping future state, and I would be no further advanced than I am now. So again, we need to break that. How did we move out of the cycle of lots of post-it notes up on walls in workshops into a place with better knowledge? So that was our other issue. But we also knew that technology has moved on significantly from every other time that we've looked at this. It's much more able to be configured. I can access it online. I can do a whole bunch of things that don't require me to go off and invest significant amounts of capital or money to get better understanding. And we had this debate. We had to understand, did we want to go the COTS route? And I know you all know what COTS are, commercial off the shelf. Lots of people in the business don't know what COTS is, so if you use that acronym, they will look at you like I did, which was... And then one day, about 3 months, and I went, what's COTS actually stand for? I knew it was off the shelf, but I hadn't quite worked out what the C was. The other side is, of course, a bit more generic business process management system, which I refer to as my box of Lego that I can configure in any way I like. Quite like Lego. So we had this debate, which way were we going to go? And so, as I mentioned, we needed to answer a series of questions. And we had been doing this on paper. So which of our pathways did we want to go? And we had some really big debates. How would those two ways be able to handle the complex legislation and rules environment that actually controls our courts? And it is a complex world, that rules environment. We needed to actually understand, were we making any trade-offs between those two pathways? Or was this just actually a bunch of urban myths that have been said for the last 5 years, so now were being said as truth? So we need to actually understand what the trade-offs were, and that was where most of the debate was. People thought quite different things about the trade-offs. We needed people to be able to see their world in a different way. So we needed them to be able to experience that new world, not just talk about that new world. We needed to understand what people liked and didn't like, and that's, when I say people, it's across a huge range of people. It's lawyers, it's judges, it's our registry staff. It's a really significantly quite diverse group of people, and we needed people to be participating really early. This felt like it was part of the organisation, not as a group of people scrawled away in a dark room for 6 months, who come out at the end and go, la la, this is where we're going. So we really wanted an active participation. We also really wanted to understand the change. We wanted to see if there were less risky but more valuable approaches that we could go down. We needed to understand the true effort that was required, both from the business and from ourselves as technologists. And we also wanted to see if suppliers could handle actually operating in quite a different way. And one of the things that we were interested in also understanding was, were suppliers ready to invest in New Zealand? Because a lot of our suppliers, of course, are international. So we needed to test that as well. So what did we do? we did something called a proof of concept, which I refer to as the dueling pox. And why I refer to it as a dueling pox is we had a supplier out of the COTS area and a supplier out of the BPMS area. And they were put up against each other head to head, which is why I refer to it as the dueling pox. What we did was we took one process out of our business. It's a complex process. It's what's called Category 3 criminal, admin and review stages. And Category 3 is, if you ever are involved in Category 3, you're going to have if you are found to be guilty, you're going to be in prison for 2 years or more. But it's not that you murdered someone. That's Category 4. So Category 3 is, 2 years or more imprisonment, so serious harm cases is what a Category 3 is. We took the first 2 phases of that. We described it to our suppliers moderately complex. That wasn't true. It's highly complex. We did strip that process down to make it viable to be able to be built. We got 2 suppliers, one representing each pathway, and the word representing is really important. We didn't go and find suppliers who were the best in breed. We were looking for a supplier who represented the pathway, because we weren't trying to get a supplier to be our final supplier. We were looking for a supplier to help us understand our trade-offs. So they had to be representative of the pathway. So that was quite hard to get our heads around at times. And then we gave them 3 weeks, and only 3 weeks, to actually put and do the tasks that we were about to ask them. They had no pre-warning. So they didn't know which process we were going to ask them to do. All they knew was the types of capabilities we wanted them to be able to demonstrate in their systems. They came in on the same day, into the same room, and went through a joint induction together. And they were both provided what we refer to as the POC book. And the POC book was actually a very important part of our process. It describes the outcomes that we were after and what they needed to build for us over that 3 weeks. And I'll go into that one in a bit more detail. We gave them limited guidance over that whole 3 weeks. We gave them only 15 minutes of business time each day at a scheduled point to ask questions, but they were actually shadowed the whole time by a group of technical people. And those technical people out of the ICT area were fundamentally trying to understand how much effort really those suppliers were putting into their tools, so that we could really see if there was any trade-off in the effort that they were doing. So fundamentally, they were watched, and they were watched around the whole time, and the people who were watching them had to circle through so that we didn't get supplier capture of it. So we actually rotated our architect team through those, but they were constantly watched. And that's that last point. So we were really focused on understanding the tools, not the supplier, because we were answering that question of what is the trade-offs between these 2 technical pathways, not who are we partnering with in the long term. So the focus was always on the tool. As I said, we had the thing called the POC book. And the POC book was not a traditional requirements book. So there was no BAs used to create that book, and that was something we were testing. Could we create a book that a supplier could take with no support and then build or configure, customize their tool to actually work for us in 3 weeks? And we told them what the outcomes were. We told them the key rules and legislation that it must support at various parts of the process. We told them what we wanted to test in each part of the process and see, but we really didn't tell them how. That was what we wanted, their insight and how their tool worked to be able to really test that. And when we gave them the book, because we weren't sure if this book would actually work, we actually got told it was the best sets of requirements that they had ever been given to be able to build something from. They found it easier to build off it than anything else. And actually, 3 weeks later, when we stood this up in front of the judiciary, virtually they were standing up very similar products. There wasn't a great big level of difference between it. So we could get consistency. Remember, we didn't support them through the 3 weeks. They had to rely on that book with only that 15 minutes of time each day to be able to actually develop their product up to a point that was usable and was recognisable as category 3. So that was why it was quite a different approach. Now, I'm just conscious of time, and I can't move over. So that was why that was really important to us. The other important thing, and I can't emphasise this enough, that book was produced by 2 people. One person was a registry staff with 3 months' knowledge from the registry. They were new, they were a graduate. And the other person was out of another part of our business, our operational team. They had no process experience at all. It was fundamentally, though, about creating the outcomes and the process that we wanted, rather than trying to do it using our typical technical ways of producing those requirements. And now we know, as we go into the next stage, that we don't have to approach that first bit, that design bit, in our traditional method, and we can do it significantly faster than we typically would have. But the proof of concept wasn't the only thing that we were doing. We did a market sounding as well. So when we went to market to find those 2 suppliers, we fundamentally went out with a document that enabled us to really ask a range of questions across all the suppliers to virtually act as our market sounding, to get information that wasn't publicly available, but would give us a real level of depth. That was both to evaluate them, to be able to put them into the proof of concept and choose, but it was also to inform our thinking about the variety of the suppliers out there. Because when I talk about there's a COTS and there's a BPMS, suppliers, really they don't sit in such clean boxes. They bleed across each other. So to be able to understand that, we needed market sounding equivalent information. It also enabled us to gather information about cost and how much, when they had been supporting other organisations to do similar change, how much that cost for those organisations. So it gave us a depth of information also around the value for money question. So market sounding was really important. The other one was reference site interviews. So all of those people who had responded to the market sounding, and we went out to a select group of people. We went out to 8, and all 8 responded to it as a market sounding, and 7 responded to be able to actually do the POC. But they all gave us reference sites. They all gave us case studies and gave us permission then to ring those case studies and do a series of interviews with them. So we could actually start to understand what was really happening on the ground. And not surprisingly, when you actually ring people and talk to them over a series of interviews, what they tell you isn't what's in the case study. So the reference sites discussions were really important because often it's more about what's happening in the business and the change and all the things that they were responsible for rather than what the supplier was responsible for. And those conversations were very, very critical to our thinking. It did also then actually start to mirror some of the things that we were seeing in the POC process itself. We had user experience feedback. So the POCs, so remember we were setting up a process into 2 systems. We put use cases through those. And we did that in front of a range of people through demonstrations so people could actually tell us what they liked and didn't like. And often what they liked or didn't like was shared across the 2 tools, So just because a tool didn't do it didn't mean that the other tool set couldn't do it, but it gave us an understanding of what users really valued, not because they read something or they put a post-it note up on a wall, but because they were seeing something in front of them that they could relate to because it was part of their business. They could actually understand. We had over 80 people see a demonstration and give us feedback. 20 of those were the judiciary, a number of people out of our registries, and some of our sector partners and lawyers got to see it. So it was really important for us to actually understand what they valued and didn't value from what they were seeing. And again, that's informed our thinking about our requirements into the future. And the other thing, and I mentioned this before, was the design of the POC process itself. It was actually allowing us to understand our own capability about undertaking this process. So the POC wasn't just about assessing two tools or two technical pathways. It was about assessing ourselves. And why that assessing ourselves is really important was we were assessing, did our leadership want to do this type of approach? We hadn't done it before. We were breaking boundaries. We weren't doing what we normally would do. And our leadership actually embraced that, supported this process, and enabled this to happen. I can't stress how important that leadership is in regarding to asking a whole organisation to do something quite differently. So we could see that. We could also see that we could do it differently. Like I said, we didn't need to have that big group of BAs mapping our processes. We could also see that we were up for investing in this type of way. We had to have, judges come off rosters, that we could actually get a whole bunch of people into rooms very, very quickly. We could watch all the behavioural changes that would be really important if we were to go ahead any further. So again, the design of the POC process itself enabled us to test ourselves and to know where we were weak and where we have real strengths. So again, evaluating who we are and could we actually undertake this change. So what's our key lessons from this process? Will I do it again? I would do it again, definitely. As a senior responsible owner, the person from the business that's representing this, I learnt, and our team and our organisation and all our partners in the judiciary, we've all learnt a lot from this process. We had a whole lot of myths. There were a whole lot of trade-offs that aren't trade-offs. There were new trade-offs that we hadn't even thought about that turned up, that actually are material to what our thinking is. So we could move away from that paper debate to actually a space where we were all having the same language, we were actually seeing the same things, and through that shared experience, actually the debate disappeared. And it virtually felt like it disappeared overnight. We ran workshops afterwards, and everyone we got into the room was like, well, yeah, we now understand. There was no real dissent any longer. And so what we had been battling for years had just evaporated through this process. So, actually understanding what is the myths and what is true is really important, and a whole lot were myths. But we definitely learnt a whole bunch that we didn't know, and has fundamentally changed our thinking about how we're going to approach this going forward. And because we're going out to market or investment case, I can't tell you what that is, but it fundamentally has changed our whole approach that we're about to undertake. As I said, it enabled us to understand ourselves. And I really challenge you to make sure that you always, as you go into this, confront ourselves in these processes. Know where it is, where we create our own barriers to the process, where we are strong, where we are weak, and therefore what we need from our supplier relationships in relation to our own strengths and weaknesses, and the types of communities that we want to be entering in. So when we used to think about buying technology, we were always worried about what the supplier was, who they were. Could we work with them? But in this day and age now, we're no longer entering into a relationship just with that supplier. We are entering into a relationship with the community that uses that tool. So is that community that also is using that tool a sophisticated community? Is it diverse? Or is it a more specialist community that reflects who you are and your own selves as an organisation? And which type of community do you need to be part of when you go into purchasing that relationship with a technology supplier? Don't just evaluate the supplier. Evaluate the community that you're about to be part of, because you're about to be part of that community for the next 10 years. And is that community one that's going to have the right longevity and sustainability going forward? So, again, really evaluate that, the importance of the underpinning community and what that means as that technology advances. Choosing a representative product, that's what we had to do. I mentioned this before. We weren't choosing a supplier. We were choosing a representative product to let us understand a technical pathway. And that's really hard to do because our procurement processes are not built around that concept. It's built around the concept of value for money. Get the best supplier you can for the money that you have. We weren't looking for that. We were looking for who sort of represents who's in that community. And both our procurement team, we trialled a way of doing it. Don't do what we did. So we learned a lot about how you actually do find and select a representative supplier. And if any of you do want to know about that in a little bit more detail, I can connect you with our procurement team, who's learned a lot about this. But yes, you are looking not for the best. You're looking for the representative. The other thing is, you need to make a balance when you ask the questions of a supplier between what you're asking them to get them to give you information for the market sounding exercise and the amount of information you need to evaluate to be able to choose that representative product. If you ask for too much information in the market sounding, suppliers will turn off from the process. But if you don't ask enough, then you can't have enough information to inform your analysis. And our analysis was about the mix of what we learned from the market sounding, user experience, the POC process itself, and those site phone calls. It was all that information together that we were using, not just one. So you have to make that balanced core between it. Now, everyone always asks me this question, so just in case it is in the list of questions, we paid for the POC, okay? So when we went to market, we went in with a fixed price per supplier. We said we will pay up to this amount. Now, that amount was not enough to cover the supplier's cost. I knew that. But that enabled me to evaluate something. Remember, I was really interested in, would international players come to New Zealand? So if I had actually paid to cover their cost, I couldn't have evaluated that. I knew that we were offering an amount of money, but it didn't cover their cost. And remember, 7 out of the 8 said yes. That told me something about the market and how interested was the market in New Zealand. So yes, we did, but we didn't cover it. And again, that was part of us evaluating, was this going to be a sustainable place to go? So yeah, you need to balance that need for market sounding information with a need to actually get people to go into a process and invest a lot of time in developing a proposal where they weren't going to be fully recouped for their effort. We needed to make sure that the team was not captured by the suppliers at any point. So I mentioned that rotation issue. We rotated our technical people through. What we didn't want was our technical people only seeing one of the products, and we also didn't want that sense of competition. I'm on Team COTS, and I'm on Team BPMS. We didn't want that. And so we had to make sure we didn't end up accidentally creating two fighting. Our dueling POCs meant that we had dueling technicians, you know. So we were very careful about it. So when I mentioned we ran an induction, and in that induction, I clearly stated, I have talked to the team. They know that they are not to have coffees with you, not to go drinking with you, not to have lunches with you, not to spend any time with you that's not within this building. So both suppliers got that, the team was there. It was very clear that we weren't being rude, we just knew that we were managing a potential conflict. And the two teams were put on different floors. One was on level 3 and one was on level 6. And we made sure that we were very careful about who sort of wandered past over that 3 weeks. So very much controlled in regards to no supplier capture, because we weren't evaluating suppliers, we were evaluating the products, as I keep saying. And so you don't have to approach any of us in the traditional way. So we've been using this to inform a treasury business case. And normally you wouldn't have thought that we would have gone around and done this type of process prior to doing the business case. But this has been integral to our thinking for the business case. The business case that we will produce is going to be significantly different from if we hadn't done this process. And we worked and discussed this with Treasury before we did it, with MB from a procurement perspective, with the GCDO, to make sure that when we were approaching this, it was actually in a way with real integrity, rather than something that would be seen as undermining that investment process. So talking this through, making sure that we had our central agencies with us on this was important. In fact, they were some of the groups that actually saw the proof of concept. They never saw the full. We gave them a mini version of it with our lessons learned about this whole process in regards to it from supporting business cases and investment cases. So, non-traditional ways fundamentally to do your options analysis within your investment case. So that was one of the key ones. And I've mentioned before, not using your BAs to create your process. I actually had some of the BAs who came to one of the proof of concept workshops come up to me afterwards and going, "You've done me out of a job, Victoria." I went, "No, I've just changed it." And so that really comes back to that theme. This POC was not about ICT, and it wasn't about the business. It was about a multidisciplinary team of people who were trying to solve a business problem. This group of people were brought together as a collective to work. They all brought different capabilities and ways of thinking. It wasn't about ICT. It wasn't about the business. It was about a group of people trying to solve a problem. And that's where I actually predict where we're going in our evolution. We talk about digital evolution as if it's about the technology evolving. But actually, it's about how we work together that needs to also evolve. That actually, we don't think about organisational structures. When we do change, it's about what multidisciplinary teams do we need to bring together to really be able to answer these types of questions. And we all bring different skills, but we may not use those skills in the same way as we traditionally did it either. We might drop some of the behaviours that sit around our disciplines so that we can actually use them in new and different ways. So multidisciplinary team that sat behind here and did this work, that same multidisciplinary team is still working on our work right now. In fact, they are all in a room over the next 2 days doing virtually a workshop where we bring in a whole range of people who haven't been part of the process to date to fundamentally unpick all of our assumptions and see if we've made some fatal error somewhere in there. Those people that are coming into the rooms today and Monday come from the business, so really much in the registry, people who have affected change before, people who have our ICT area, or fundamentally trying to look at it and make sure that we haven't lost something in this process as we analyse it. So yeah, that multidiscipline approach has been really, really critical. So that's my key lessons. Another one, okay, yep. Is technology, once we get past the business case, what I've seen through this process enables me to recognise that we can now go about implementing really differently. Very, very differently. So, normally after you've got your investment case, you go off and you've done all your full requirements and you go out and get your supplier and you purchase yourself, I want that box to be pink. And then when you want it to be blue, you go into another contract negotiation. Fundamentally, we want to move away from that world. And what we've seen and learned makes me think we can. So we want to go potentially into a process where we do process design like you typically would, not using traditional techniques, but do some process design work, to get a document similar to our POC document that records what we want to a sufficient level. Not too much, not too little, Goldilocks zone. So a document's sufficient. And we've probably got about 75% right. 25% will be completely wrong, but it's okay. Then we will get the supplier to do what we've actually asked them to do under the POC situation, which is to make their tool do what we asked them to do it. And through doing that, they will have some innovations and thoughts, and we'll probably move our process to be about 85% right. And then we'll take that, and very like we did in our demonstrations, bring people into the equivalent of like design theatres, show them the products using use cases, and actually design on the spot. You don't like it being on the left-hand side, let's turn and put it on the right-hand side in front of people and then see how that user experience works. So I haven't gone to the business and gone, here's a book, Matt. It's really large. Tell me if this is what you really want for your business. Because if you give me those books, I don't read them. Or because I usually go to sleep about page 10. So actually this enables us to really test, does the user want what we've put together? So once we've got all that, we've probably got the process about 90% right. We'll put it into pilots. After the pilots, it will be refined again, and then we would go into full implementation. So rather than trying to get it all right at the beginning, what we are looking at is trying to get it just right. Just right, a minimum viable product with a minimum viable process that enables us to evolve over time, both as our maturity and our understanding matures as well. So that's what we're looking at. The other thing I think that technology now allows us to do is actually do a whole lot ourselves, not from a supporting technology as a service, any of that, but actually as our rules and things and our business changes, that we as a business take on more and more of that configuration ourselves. It's what we've seen internationally as we've done all the site conversations that is happening. And those people who are doing it are mixed teams. They are mixed teams internationally of both business and technology. There's not one or the other, they're both, and they're together, and it enables you to continue to refine those tools as you move forward, rather than being waiting for a supplier to do it for you. So taking control of the business aspects of the tool is what we've seen internationally and what we've seen through the proof of concept that can actually be enabled. And those teams, when they are put in place, will not be technology, they will not be business, they will be both. And I think that is the key message you probably have got already, which is that this idea of boundaries is gone. This idea of using and holding really tightly to our professional identity and all those techniques that we use around it are gone. We must be not just agile in technology terms, but agile as people and as humans, and that we actually don't talk about being multidisciplined. We actually deliberately go across and create those teams and recognise as we create those multidisciplined teams, it's going to be challenging. You're going to have great debates and conflict, and that's okay, because through that conflict is where you actually get insight and innovation. Thank you. I heard yesterday that someone got asked to sing as their first question. I'm deeply disappointed that's not mine. What were the challenges with getting suppliers to do 3 weeks' work with no promise of future work? It wasn't actually a problem. And that's part of that testing of the market. Was the market interested enough in investing in NZ? Now, our situation is relatively unique in regards to justice. There is nowhere in the world which has been able to solve the problem that we're trying to solve from a multi-jurisdictional way. So when I talk about multi-jurisdictional, I mean from criminal courts to your family court to your civil court. There is no example of that. So from a supplier's perspective, if you can be in this market and get that, you have something very viable internationally. And we were testing how sexy were we? And we are. So that's fundamentally why it works for us. In regards to suppliers, we are sexy. Who knew? But yeah. Can you please sing, Victoria? I said if this question came up, I would say yes, on the condition that you all stood up and sung as well with me. So, who wants to do it? You can vote with your feet. If you'd like me to sing, please stand and we can sing together. I need over 50%. I'm saying 30, maybe 40, come on. Okay, I'll give you 60%. Okay, so now we have to choose a song that we all know. I had said it would be the national anthem in Te Reo, but I suspect that might not be the best choice. So we could do something, who knows Daisy Daisy from their childhood? Put their hands up if you know Daisy Daisy. Couple. Such sad childhoods. Only a few of you know Daisy Daisy. Okay, what about Mary Had a Little Lamb? Yes, okay. We're going to do Mary Had a Little Lamb. Let's see if we can all remember it from our childhood. 1, 2, 3. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mary had a little lamb, his fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, Mary went, Mary went. And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go. Excellent. Okay, they got voted up really quickly. You did beautifully as a room. Okay, next question. How did you manage the business expectations? Often business wants to go live with the POC. They couldn't actually go live with the POC because we put a minimum viable process through the POC. So we did lots of cheats. Things that were there because like part of the process was too complex to ask suppliers to do in 3 weeks. So it wasn't a viable product to put out there afterwards. So that sort of solved the problem. The other one was we had done it purely online in the web. So we hadn't looked at security. We hadn't looked at anything about integration with ourselves. So when we set up this POC, we deliberately said it had to be independent of our own systems so that we could do this fast. So it was a requirement for to be part of the POC process that they could do it. Now, not all suppliers can do that. And so when we would go out to market, the types of things that we'd be evaluating in our suppliers later is going to be really different from what we were evaluating to choose a POC supplier. And so, yep, business could be really excited by it, and they were, but actually we hadn't asked the questions and we hadn't evaluated the right things for a long-term supplier relationship. So that's how we manage that side. One more. I can pick. I feel like I answered your other question, Matt, which was, can we all sing? So how do we avoid analysis paralysis when risk management is a core mechanism of government? How do we manage it? We didn't analyse in the traditional way, because that's what we had been doing. We had been analysing forever on paper and post-it notes. So the fact is that once you can analyse using reality, actually bringing your suppliers into the discussion and being able to see things, that issue just evaporates. You do have to be very disciplined in how you run your POC process so that you actually get, and you're very clear what you're trying to analyse. So we spent quite a bit of time not trying to analyse, but to be able to go, what are we truly needing to know to be able to invest, to make decisions, and then we designed everything around that. So we weren't analysing per se at the beginning, we were creating a framework by which we would do the analysis later. So just the process itself got rid of that one. We cool? One more? How difficult was this process, to fit this process within government procurement processes? Easy. As in, we discussed it with MB, we discussed it with our procurement people. It was something that we could do. We had to be very clear when we went out to market what we were doing it for, that we wouldn't be going further from this process, and that there was a whole amount of time that would need to happen between now and then. We may not even go ahead. We might get through this process, we might analyse the investment case, and actually go, it's not the right time, and we were quite open to that. That if we went into this process and found out that the technology was not yet mature enough, we would back out. So we were very open about that. And we also could do it because what we were evaluating for the POC and what we were asking suppliers for is not the same sets of questions we will be asking them if we do go out to market. So that solved that issue of conflict between the two parts. We're evaluating quite different things, and that enabled us to go out commercially to market. I believe that's us. So thank you, everyone, and great singing.